In this video course, we're going to cover how to create minimal architectural portfolios for academics and professionals. And we're also going to reference a lot of classical examples from architects and artists like Piranesi and Palladio and other architects from classical, neoclassical, and pre-modern era. And obviously, this isn't to copy the aesthetic of the work, but it's more so to learn from actual layout design of how architects from hundreds of years ago would really pay attention to how they presented their work in drawing and print format. And these are principles that we can still apply today. It doesn't matter that it's hundreds of years ago. It's still the same exact principles when it comes to layout design, particularly when you present architectural work. And so we're going to go ahead and take those principles and we're going to create a minimal architectural portfolio for today's standards. And so I'm hoping that this course is going to be very helpful for anyone who's really trying to create a minimal architectural template that they can use. And so that this template can be something that can be used over a long period of time, where maybe they do small adjustments here or there. I would also like to point out that a lot of the examples that you see in the portfolio design are items or designs or geometries or objects that I have created in previous videos and previous tutorials. So if you're curious how to create specific types of projects, you're going to most likely find those projects that you're going to see in the portfolio in previous videos that I've made. I would say that there's placeholder texts, placeholder images. I haven't covered renderings yet. I'm going to cover that in a future video, but the actual massing, the diagrams, the sections, the axonometrics, certain massing configurations, I've covered plenty of videos for that you can see in previous videos. The first architect I'm going to cover is Piranesi. Piranesi, I think his name is Giovanni Battista Piranesi, or some people call him Gian Battista Piranesi. He was an Italian architect from the 1700s. I think this is called the Settecento era. Some would call it late Baroque, neoclassical. And he was originally from Venice. He had a couple of roles. He was not only an architect, but also an artist and, most importantly, an archaeologist. And he loved Roman antiquity. He had a passion for Roman antiquity, so much so that he left Venice and lived in Rome his entire life, creating etchings of famous Roman structures, whether they're ancient ruins, museums, bridges, random buildings, homes. He documented thousands of works in Rome and typically sold them as etchings. And so the reason why I'm covering Piranesi is because his work is beautifully documented, meticulously documented, incredibly organized, thematic. It has a genre to it. Things are in specific categories. And so I would say there are two great resources to find his work. One of them is the Massachusetts Digital Commonwealth. They have a great collection of Piranesi's work, and it's all Creative Commons and it's in the public domain. Another great location is in the University of Tokyo. They did a collaboration with, I think, an institute in Italy, and it has almost the entire collection of Piranesi's work. So some people say that Piranesi created about 2,000 folios in specific categories and genres. And after he passed away, his son and one of Piranesi's former partners in business collected all of his work. And so it's one of the very few works that we have that's almost collected in continuity. And so, for example, on the University of Tokyo website, if you go to the Piranesi section and if you go on the subject search, you can see all of the categories of his work, diagrams, imaginary architecture, friezes, trophies, chairs, coffee pots, interiors, exteriors. His work is so well documented. And part of the reason why I'm also showing this is because it is probably one of the quintessential examples of how to lay out your architectural works. And people might think that minimal layout design and using a lot of negative space is something that's a recent phenomenon, but actually it's not a fad whatsoever. A lot of architects, both from classical periods to neoclassical to pre-modern, they have a huge respect in regard to negative space. And so I'm going to show and run through a lot of examples. As you can see on the screen, I have a lot of tabs open, but I'm going to run through some examples of Piranesi's work and Palladio's work and a couple of other architects' work to show how they lay out their work. And then I'm also just, again, like I said in the intro, I'm going to show you how to lay out, your current work with my previous examples that I've shown in other projects. So right away, if we look at this example here, right off the bat, what we can tell here is just this respect for negative space. He could have made the plan much larger on the frame, right? Could have filled up the entire page, could have filled up the entire folio. But there is this balance of negative space with the positive space taken up by the actual drawing itself, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is that the drawing is working with the sheet. It's working with the folio. The proportions of the drawing works well with the proportions of the sheet, okay? And I'm going to zoom in on here, but more importantly is that every single thing is a graphic element, right? It's not just the actual content itself, like the drawing itself or the rendering or the diagram, but even the text is a graphic element, right? So if we look here, right? So I'm zooming in way too much. Let me zoom out just a little bit, right? The annotation of this text is different than the annotation of this text, right? Which is going to be different than the annotation of this text, right? So one is in capital, one is in lowercase, and one's in title case, right? And then descriptive text is in a completely different case. And then the scaling. And this is consistent in all of his work. Any of his work where he's showing like archaeological as-built, right? Or drawings that show existing buildings. He's showing it in a way that is very consistent. And so this is consistent in all of his works. Let's look at the next project. Again, a very simple floor plan, right? Specific titling. Let me zoom in. You have very specific titling, right? And then, again, the annotations, right? The way that he labels the spaces is different than the way that he labels his keys. And again, it's very consistent. And he didn't have to fill up, like you see, he didn't make the drawing massive. He's respecting the margins. The margins are being respected on the folio. So I want to really express a very important point, which might sound a little silly, but your portfolio is not about your portfolio. It sounds very silly, but your portfolio is about your work. And everything that's inside of your portfolio should act as a frame for your work, for your content. Your portfolio should not distract from your content. So that goes for your layout type, your text type, your annotation styles. All of these things are graphic elements that should help how you present your content. And so if you look here, I immediately am gravitated towards the content. I notice the content because everything else is framing the content. All of this large amount of negative space is framing the content. Even the plan itself is respecting the negative space within its own little frame as well. So we have this big, margin, right? And then we have this margin here as well. And so the proportions are respected. The negative space is respected. The text size is respected. Everything is working with each other. Don't worry so much about, can they read the text? Would they be able to read the text? Just work and focus on the idea that, is everything proportional? Is is this helping the drawing, or is this helping the presentation of the content, or is it taking it away, right? And so these things matter. Like, people worry, oh, are they going to read the text? Usually, if you're like a new graduate, they're most likely not going to read the text that you present in a portfolio, right? If you're applying, like, for your first job ever, they're going to pay attention to certain aspects, but your text is more so just used as a graphic element. And this is a perfect example. I mean, for documentation purposes, I actually really want to read the text, you know? But in general, the sizing of the text matters, right? Everything matters. All of the graphic elements matter. Let's go to the next one. All right, now a next important point I want to bring up, especially if you're going to do like a minimal portfolio, right? A portfolio that has a lot of negative space around it, is that your content needs to be impactful, but not busy. And what I mean by this is that your content should show a lot of information, but not be busy. It doesn't have to happen on every page. It doesn't have to happen on every spread, but you really need to hit them with a drawing for like each project that really gives them a lot of information. This is a really great example. First off, it's on a spread, right? That's number one. He could have rotated it and did portrait, but he put it on a spread. That's number one. Number two is that the right side is showing different information than the left side. The right side is probably showing an underground condition of the plan, and the left side is showing, probably an above or plaza level of the plan, right? So you're getting a lot of information at once. And I'll show you other examples. And again, look at the annotations and the labels. They're all working with the drawing, right? Here he's doing different annotations for different labeling types. But he's still doing the capitals, the lowercase letters, and stuff like that. And then again, you see the same format. It always has descriptive text on the bottom. Let's go to the next drawing. Elevation. Great example. Look, this elevation could have been on a portrait, but he's keeping it on a spread. I already showed you two examples of where he put drawings on a portrait. This one's still on a spread. And so because the proportions work on the page, right? So again, this idea of working with the page, making sure proportions are taken into consideration, right? And again, you see capital keys, right? Descriptive text on the bottom. And a lot of information is shown on this elevation. It's impactful. You get lighting, right? You get scale, you get texture, you get massing, you get depth, you get form, right? All from just this one elevation. And so again, and I'm going to reiterate, you're going to hear me repeat myself a lot in this course, but it's a very impactful drawing, right? It's evoking a lot of imagery or evoking a lot of information. And to be honest, the text gives it, I guess, another like layer of complexity. If you took everything away, like if you took away this text on the bottom and the keys, it kind of makes it look less technical. But because you're adding these keys, it gives it this technical feel to it. Here's another great example of showing a lot of information on a page, right? We're getting an elevation detail with a plan detail. And again, titling, descriptive text on the bottom. And these are all from like completely different works, right? This is like, these works aren't like interrelated. They're all completely different works, but you see the consistency that he has in his graphic style. It's so important to have this rigor and this consistency in your work. And so, the dimension styles are going to be a different style, but they're all going to be within like the same family. Absolutely beautiful. Another example, right? Plan section. You're starting to get the pattern, right? So I don't need to like describe, but it's just great to look at. Elevation detail. And I think this is a diagram up above. Let me zoom in on this. And again, look at the proportions, how this one's portrait, working with portrait. So sometimes, you're going to go full spread, and sometimes you're going to stick per page. And you're going to see that once I show you like the actual portfolio design. This is a great example of showing an impactful image, right? You're getting plan, elevation, section all at once, right? And so what's really important about this is the scale of the drawing, right? I'm looking at it from a perspective where I can absorb it all at once, right? He could have made this drawing bigger so that we get to see everything at once, but I'm viewing it at a position where it's really supposed to be absorbed all at once. So I understand immediately that I'm looking at a plan section or plan elevation section right away. And I can zoom in if I want to, right? I can zoom in and like really appreciate it at a level like this, right? To really appreciate the texture and the depth and the shadow. But the scale allows you to really absorb the drawing right away, which is important in some portfolios because you get to see the work immediately and impactfully, right? If this was really large on a sheet, you might start to view it in a more like fragmented way where your eye might focus on the plan, your might then eye focus on the elevation, your eye might focus on the section separately. Whereas this one's really giving you a graphic element of, hey, these should be viewed together all at once. You know, this is more about assembly, right? You're seeing section detail, elevation detail, plan detail of columns. Again, elevation details. This is, you know, very busy. I would say this is actually quite busy. And so like you wouldn't want to have this on every spread, right? You might want to have this just on one spread or like one spread per project because this is quite busy. Even with all of this negative space here, this starts to become a little busy. But, you know, these are all details. And I'll show you some of Palladio's work as well that does this. But you don't want to do this on every single spread, right? Because it gets very busy. Like right now, it's hard to digest this all at once because I'm seeing larger scale drawings versus smaller scale drawings. Absolutely beautiful, right? You're getting almost like a narrative, right? So this is where like almost the spread is acting as like a narrative for the drawing. And so, I mean, this is probably like a 2 spread, so 4 pages, right? If you like divided it in half. And so if we look at it, like we're getting I think two elevation details, right? But he's really giving a narrative of almost like a story of what's happening to the rubble right here, right? So maybe, I think this might be like the base condition. I could be mistaken. Like a structural base elevation condition. But just like you're getting an entire story from this drawing when you're looking at it. But the layout matters. Look how it's laid out. It's respecting, it's working with the page number 1. You know, negative space is definitely taken into consideration, right? All around and even in between. Annotations are all consistent. So these things are super important to take into consideration. And then again, another multi-layer drawing. Again, this is busy. And so you need to be careful when you do things like this, right? Like you don't want to do it for every single sheet, maybe like once per project. And so now if we go to Palladio's work, you know, Palladio is famous for the 4 books of architecture. I'm not going to go through everything, obviously, but, you know, this is a great example of an impactful image, right? You're getting a section on the top right, an elevation on the top left, and then a plan detail on the spread. You see? And this is a great example of showing a lot of information, but not busy. It's impactful, but it's not busy. So you want to try to have this quality of information per project on your portfolio. Ideally, right? Where like every project is giving you some kind of detailed information that almost like gives you a story of the project beyond the diagram, beyond the sketches, beyond the model. And it's like you know, it's just like one large hit. And that really bodes well for a lot of minimal portfolios. Like minimal portfolios, these types of drawings really help them out, right? Because it's very impactful. Let's go here. Again, this is a good example of a drawing that's showing you, you know, impactful information of a section. This is more of like a section elevation, right? Because you get a lot of depth with the section and then the plan detail. And Palladio shows us a lot in a lot of his works. Let me just go here. I want to show just a couple other works from Palladio. This one's another good example. You see? Where you're getting section, ghosted section of above, elevation here, and then plan. It's beautiful. So these works are very impactful, right? Like, and there's a lot of negative space around. Again, I told you I'm going to be very redundant with what I say, but I just really want to nail this in the head about this idea of respecting negative space, consistency, working with the page. These are things that aren't like, modern phenomenon, like this idea of like minimal space and not having so much busyness on the page. This is stuff that's been done hundreds of years ago, right? And then we look at, like something like a closer example. This is, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And I think this is by Joseph Weber. It's an American-German architect. But again, look at this on the sheet, First off, the color is beautiful. The contrast is beautiful, but it's not super busy. And then these are, like, again, Georgian period drawings. This is a really busy drawing. It's a beautiful drawing, but it's busy. And it's absolutely okay. First off, this would look amazing on a portfolio, right? Just this level of detail. But you want to make sure there's a lot of negative space around this drawing so that it calms it down. It kind of tames it. But then, like, this space, the drawing itself, the sky is already has this level of intensity to it that's kind of calming it down with negative space as well up here, right? It's not like heavily cropped. The sky is giving out a lot of negative space, so that helps. Same thing here, there's a lot of sky up here. And even the poche here is helping as well. But these are very like intense drawings, right? This one's a little bit more tame because the colors are more muted. But I would definitely say like a drawing like this would need more negative space around it if you were going to put on a sheet or portfolio, because it really calms it down. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to move over and show examples of a full portfolio layout with like in a more like minimal portfolio with, I guess, generous negative space. I'm going to talk about the cover and obviously talk about all the layouts, but before I do that, I want to actually go into InDesign and show you the actual margins that I'm working with. The layout that you see here is what I use for every single portfolio that I make. And I would say it's kind of important to realize that as you're progressing through your architectural experience, whether it's academic or professional, especially in professional, is that you're not going to have time to always recreate a portfolio. You want to reach a point where you have a template and a layout that you can reuse. And this becomes more true when you have more experience, because then you really start to pick certain works that you want to show and that you can swap out. You can swap out pages or take out pages and you use them as work samples. And the more consistent and the more clean your layout is, the easier it is to reuse it. And we don't want to obsess over our portfolios. Even though, architects are kind of obsessive and perfectionists, you have other things to do. And so I think it's so important to make sure that your portfolio layout is clean enough that you can reuse it and be consistent, especially as you progress. And so I guess going back to this idea of that your portfolio is not about your portfolio, it's about your work, is that, you don't want to have or be stuck with a layout where the text is outdated or the text size just doesn't work well with your project. You want to be rigid in the text that you're using, the negative space that you're working with. And so I found that this, for me personally, is very helpful in just having this reused for whether it's work samples or portfolios. And I use a very simple layout. I base things off of a letter size format in the US, and in Europe and in Asia they use A format sizes, but I'm just using a letter format, right? Because it's the most commonly used. I can print it out tabloid if I wanted to, fold it in half, perfect saddle stitch if I wanted to. I've done that multiple times. And just personally, in my previous employer, I had to review multiple portfolios. I mean, hundreds of portfolios. I was a project designer with my previous employer. So I had to review hundreds of portfolios. And so, the ones that we look out for, obviously, number one, is we want to make sure that we're making sure they're applying for the tasks that we're looking for, right? You want to make sure that you're applying for the specific tasks that an employer is looking for, whether it's people who have construction experience or more design experience or rendering experience. You want to cater your portfolio to what they're looking for. So that's number one. Number two is the layouts that worked best with us are the layouts that had a good respect and balance of negative space and weren't afraid to really take advantage of negative space because it really was easy to flip through the portfolio. I'll go into more detail about this, especially when it comes to like applying professionally. But let me just go into the margins here. So like I work with really big margins. This right here is a 1-inch margin, quite large from here to here. That's my main margin. And so nothing goes beyond this spread. This margin, nothing goes beyond this, okay? So this here would be a full spread. And I don't go beyond this. So that's number one. And then number two is I have a 1/2-inch margin for my headers and my footers. So my headers, and I'll zoom in on this, right? So that's at 1/2 inch. And then I have another 1/2 inch within the main margin, because if I'm gonna have like a full spread and I have like a text or labeling or something like that, right? I want there to be like a relief, right? I want there to be relief away from the image, okay? And that's it. After I have that established, I do whatever I want. If I want to follow rules of thirds or whatever rules you want to follow, that's fine. But I do whatever, if I want my layout to be like this, and then text here, right? Or an image there and text here, whatever I find that works best. But I just make sure I don't go beyond these margins over here, right? I don't never ever go beyond these margins. I never do full bleed. I always do I can do full spread, but never full bleed. So that's basically it. And I use this for everything. So, up here on this header, I have portfolio, then your name, right? And then here, this is optional, project title. And then down here, just your page numbers. And it's preference, whether you want it centered or to the left or to the right. That's pure preference. So I like things center justified, but there are times where, especially when you're doing print, you don't want to put text obviously in the center because it's just going to fall, right into the binding, right? I guess in the gutter is what they call it. So you really don't want that. You want it around the edges here if you're going to print it out, because things that are centered, you're just never going to read it. But for like digital spread, centering text is absolutely fine. So let me go back to the actual portfolio example. I think it's so important to really take your cover page into consideration, because your cover page evokes almost like a personality or an attitude of what's to come in your portfolio. It's almost like a preamble or like a preface of, this is what I'm about. And so, architects are very image-based people. We judge quickly with what we see. And so your cover kind of gives an impression immediately of what's to come. And you kind of need to be careful of what you show in your cover. And you can show whatever you like that is very evoking, and it gives them like a great preface of the type of content they're about to experience, right? So you can show a plan detail, a section, a rendering, a diagram, a model, study model, anything that looks nice that kind of lures them in and is like a kind of ominous in a sense, right? I don't want to make this full bleed, number one, because first off, that's not the margins that I'm going with. And number two, it kind of gives them the impression that I really care about renderings, right? That I only want to do renderings. And that's not what I'm about, right? I'm not about I'm not a renderer, right? So I don't want to show this off as like this huge rendering, because it gives them a false impression of what they're going to experience. And it also gives them a little too much information at the beginning. And so I think going back to that example of those sections from the classical examples that I was showing of how I was saying they were a little too busy and they need a lot of white space around them or negative space, this is a really good example of how, negative space really calms the rendering down. Kind of gives it like a calming, especially if the rendering is like very intense or the drawing is very intense, it gives like a calming nature to it, right? Another example is you don't do rendering. You can show like an assembly, right? I personally don't like this, but this evokes a certain attitude or personality to your portfolio to right off the bat from the cover page. You see, it says, oh, maybe this person really thinks about assembling detail. I wonder what I'm going to see, right? And then this is another different type of rendering, right? So one is like, it was very moody and evocative, and this rendering is just, again, you still don't know what's going on, but the greenery itself kind of changes the attitude of the portfolio and like the things that are to come. I personally like this the best because there's just something very ominous about it. And I actually had this very last in my portfolio. So when you open up the portfolio, you're not going to see this until the very end. And that's intentional, right? You want to lure them through your portfolio. I will talk into more detail about resumes on here, but yeah, I'll get back to this. But here's just a table of contents. Again, a lot of this is just for graphic sake. This isn't really to, like, if they want to read it, that's fine. You obviously want it to be accurate and real. But this isn't really for this to be read and like, so they're not going to sit down and like read your table of contents, but it's just a graphic element. Okay, so every single page that I have for my portfolio is always going to have this sequencing of content. I'm going to have an overarching image, descriptive text in specific formatting, right? So this is going to be a specific size, subtitle, specific size, and then descriptive text, specific size, and then captioning a specific size, right? So these are all the same size over here, right? The captioning here, the titling here, all the same size, and then the heading text and descriptive text is a specific format, and that's followed all the way through every single project. And then what I do is you want to take them from general to specific, okay? So you want to take them from just general diagram, right, to maybe model study models or diagrams or sketches, to more descriptive like plans and sections, details, elevations, like that. And I find that best. And I think this really applies to maybe new graduates, like people who just finished graduate school, who are finished 5-year applying for their first job, where if you're applying more so to a design-centric office, they might want to see more of your design process. And so it's really great to show like an overarching image, right? And then show your sequencing of work and your progress of work, whether it's hand sketches or model photos or diagrams. And I'll show you different examples. I want to change the color of this to gray. Yeah. So there's a couple things that you should look at here to take into consideration. And so number one is the margins. Again, you see, I'm always respecting the margins, right? I'm never going beyond the margins, right? So that's number one. Number two is that I'm also paying a lot of respect to negative space, right? Even the spacing here, how things are spaced out, and the spacing of the text, right? And my alignments, like here, I'm aligning the tops. This is a matter of preference, right? You could align the centers if you wanted to. You could have the same negative space underneath if I wanted to, right? So these are options. And so like you might say it might be breaking consistency, but you're really not, because the whole thing reads consistently to begin with. And so, you kind of want basically like if I drew like an X or a cross, right? This space here, it has all like this equal amount of negative space around it, right? And so this is really important to have this negative space. You're really respecting, it's not just the margins, it's even in between your actual diagrams and sketches. It's very important. And so also here, if you notice, like I have this kind of pushed in, right? This is kind of pushed in even away from the margins where like this lines up, right? I'll show you an example where this is more spread out, but I'll show that in other projects. So again, we're going from general to specific here, right? We're going from actual overarching image to hand sketches as an example, or diagrams, which I'll show you in other examples. And then we'll go to, like, for example, model photos, right? So I'm showing you like study models on the left, and then I'm showing final model on the right, right? So again, spacing matters, right? Just the way you space things out, all the spacing matters. This is intentional, right? You want kind of want this to bleed in. But at the same time, you want your text not to feel like it's floating away. So like I like if I did this, right, and divided it, I don't want my text right in the middle because then it kind of feels like it's floating away from the image above it. I want the text to feel like it belongs to this, right? But at the same time, I'm still going to have a certain spacing in between this. And then this spacing is going to have a certain spacing, right? And so you don't have to do nine photos if you didn't want to. You can do 6 or you can do 4 or 3. But just make sure there's a contrast of content. If I go back up quickly, you see there's a contrast of content. I'm always trying to do like rendering, drawing, right? I don't want to do like rendering, like just constant renderings. I want to contrast, so like maybe smaller images of models to like one large, so that there isn't a lot of competition between the two. And also, you can take any study model and make it look beautiful, right? You just need to make sure that you're photographing it nicely, like a nice background, whether it's an all black background or an all white background or a monochrome background. Don't worry if your study model isn't like crafted beautifully. If you kind of overexpose it and put out like on a white background, a lot of white space, and photograph it in a nice background, it'll look nice. And, process is a lot, especially for people who are new graduates, working at more design-centric offices. I'm using the word design-centric. So I made a video about a month ago or 2 months ago talking about all the different architectural practice types, right? And the majority of architectural practice types are service and design driven, but they either lean more towards the design side or more towards the service side. So if you're going to apply to a practice that's like more design, on the more design side, they're most likely going to want to see your process work, right? And it's super important for them to see your process work. And so seeing the hand sketches or diagrams and then study model process is a great example of letting them know that you're process driven as well. And the text here, right? I'm using this just as placeholders, as graphic elements. You just make things up, like make up whatever you want. No one's gonna sit there and critique you on what you say here, right? Unless you have typos, you got to be careful. But even if you have typos, they probably wouldn't even pay attention to it. But watch your typos. Don't have typos. Avoid typos. I probably have typos on here, but avoid typos. But I'm saying these are more so for like graphic elements, right? So I do give it titles though. Let me just go back up. I forgot to mention this. Like I'm giving my projects a title. I'm giving it like a story, Shed in the Plains, or you want to evoke some type of story to your project. And then here again, I'm going to rendering. Right? And again, approach from planes. It's kind of boring, but caption of like what they're probably looking at or something, again, make up the text and then floor plan. So again, rendering, drawing, I'm contrasting it. And again, look, I'm always respecting the margins. I always respect the margins. And then here is drawing. So if you see the sequencing, I'm going like rendering, sketches, model photos, then rendering, floor plan, and then here I'm showing more drawing. Because I don't want this to feel rendering heavy, right? I want this to have a good balance of renderings and drawings. And so here I'm showing an axon and then, an exploded axon. An axon section, exploded axon. And then last page, plan detail, and then rendering. I personally think there's too many renderings in this project. But this is a, plan detail, right? Again, this is this idea of like an impactful content, right? Especially in a minimal portfolio, you want to show content that's impactful. So like, I think this is like impactful, right? Because it's giving you a lot of information. This is impactful. It's giving you a lot of information, but it's not busy, right? It's not chaotic. And so you want to give like this plan detail here, right? So this plan detail is great, especially if you maybe have a couple years of experience to let them know that you know how to put like a drawing together, right? But you're showing it more so, I guess, in a graphic format than in like in a construction document format. And so again, annotations and labels, this is all for like graphic elements as well. These are all graphic elements, right? The way I label things, I'm also working with the graphics. Like I don't have this pushed all the way to the edge. I'm even giving this a tolerance here. So your tolerances and spacing of text, again, it matters a lot. But that's it for this project. And I would say this project is really about assembly. If I was going to show this in a portfolio, like if you notice, I don't really have a section detail, right? Or like a major cross section. I'm going to go backwards just from the beginning, right? So I have plans and hand sketches, or excuse me, renderings and hand sketches, right? And then I have model photos. And then I have rendering and plan, right? And then I do have like a basic axon section, but not like a crazy actual true section. And then I have an assembly. And then I have a plan detail. Because my portfolio, my other projects, my portfolio, they're going to show sections. They're going to show other elements that I don't show here. And that's why it goes back to this idea of like, you don't have to show everything from a project. You can spread out the content. This project, I'm going to show a little bit of this. That project, I'm going to show a little bit of that. You know, one project, I'm going to show more renderings. Other project, I'm going to show more like axons and diagrams, you know? So this is the next project, right? You know, courtyard well house. Like, I'm just making things up. And so if you notice here, this one, I'm doing like actual diagrams, right? I'm doing actual diagrams. Other one was hand sketches. This one you can show like an operational diagram. And again, if we look at the margins and the spacing, right? This matters. Like this white space, all of this matters. Like all this is consistent, right? It's okay that this breaks it. It's okay. Like I mentioned, sometimes you're going to break the consistency as long as the consistency that you break isn't distracting. So like, you know, this goes up higher, right? Like, so, you know, this gap here is more than this gap, but that's okay. That's okay because you can read the overall like negative space, right? Consistency that you see here. You can read it. It doesn't matter. So it's not that distracting. But again, overarching image and some process diagram work, right? And then model photos. It doesn't have to be 6. It can be 4 or 3. And I just want to pause. Some people might say, okay, this is too redundant. It's boring. And I have 2 responses. Number one, yeah, it is boring. It is redundant. But it doesn't matter. Like, as long as the content you're showing varies, I wouldn't worry so much if your layouts feel redundant and boring. I think, again, your portfolio is not about your portfolio. It's about your content. And you want to make sure that your content is varied, right? And so you kind of have to be like confident in showing the layout, right? You need to be confident in your layout. That's why when I showed a lot of Piranesi's work, some of his work, there's like huge amounts of negative space. Like that very first example of the radial ruin, right? That was like in a radial floor plan. It was just that, nothing else. A little bit of poche, a lot of negative space. You kind of have to be like confident behind what you're showing. And if you do that and you have like a lot of consistency in your graphics, it evokes a certain level of confidence in your work. Not only that, it also lets, you know, if you're applying for a job, lets the employer know you really care about consistency, which shows them that, okay, if you work like on an actual drawing set, you're also going to care about consistency, right? Which is super important like on a construction document set. It means that you're very attuned to detail. So it is a critique. It's a fair critique. Yeah, this is boring. It's redundant. But in my opinion, I don't mind that it looks boring or looks redundant. And also, like, again, if you're like a professional, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of experience, and you're going to apply to another position, to another firm, and you need to update your portfolio, having that type of layout helps you update it quickly. And so here you see I'm doing a full spread for a plan, right? So this one's really about the plan and the section. The other one, the first project I showed you was about assembly, right? You had axon, exploded axon, right? This one's really about plan section. So I'm doing a very large full spread plan on this one. And you see how it works with the page? So in the first project, nothing was full spread. And this project, now we're starting to show full spreads. So again, so when I say this might be boring, but again, if you show varied work like this and you play around with the margins, it adds variety to it. And so this one here, it's an impactful image. It's detailed. It's really taking you into the plan, right? I could have made this plan more detailed, but this is just for example's sake. And again, you know, so going back to like layout, you know, if you were going to print this, this wouldn't work if I put the text here, right? Because this is where the gutter is. You would need to put this, you need to justify it left or right. But here it's fine because if it's only digital, then it doesn't matter. But again, you know, my dimensions are going to be a certain style, right? Certain color, everything. Always respecting the margin. Remember, I never go beyond this margin here. I'm really respecting the margin here. Super important. And then full spread section. So again, this project is really about the drawings. It's not about the renderings. It's really about the drawings. And again, if you look up here, I'm using the keys as a graphic element. They're not going to sit there and read it. They might read it, some might be curious, but it's really about the, I'm really using this as a graphic element, even when I'm calling these things out here, right? It's all about the graphic element. Next page, and then now, right, I'm going to take you to rendering and then section detail, right? So the first project was a plan section detail. This one's a section detail. And so if you notice, the first project I really didn't show you, the very first project I didn't show a cross section, but in this project I'm giving you a cross section. So you see you're getting everything that they may want to look for in your portfolio, even if they go by quickly, right? So if someone's going by quickly, they're getting it. They're getting it, right? If they're going by quickly. They're seeing, okay, I'm seeing varied work and stuff like that. Okay, next project. I don't like these diagrams here, to be honest. They don't look good, but I just for example's sake. But again, I'm always going to respect the negative space. Always respect the negative. Even this very simple rectangle, don't worry about it. Like, don't feel like you need to make it busy. Just own it. You got to own this stuff. And again, here, I'm breaking the consistency, but that's okay. It's not distracting. It's not distracting. Could have added a dash line here but again, always respecting negative space. I could have maybe pushed this down just a little bit more, but that's okay. Again, same format. I think that rendering here is a little boring, but I could have added a different rendering on here. But just again, overarching image. I think, to be honest, this would have been a great scenario of adding a model photo here, to be honest. But we'll go into that later. But sorry. You could switch up your overarching image. It doesn't have to be a rendering. You can switch it up so that it's a model photo, a really nice model photo, right? Or like a really nice diagram. It doesn't have to be a rendering. But I'm just showing the rendering just for consistency's sake. And then, study model photos. Again, this study model photo looked great, right? And then here's a rendering. This is the rendering that was on the cover. So you see how deep it is into the portfolio? It's very deep into the portfolio. So I don't give it to them right away. You kind of lure them into the portfolio, let them go through, and then you hit them with the rendering. And so you see this is rendering full spread. So the other project was drawing full spread only, not rendering full spread. So this project is more like image-based. So I would say the very first project is about assembly. The second project is really about section and plan. And then this project is really about the image, right? And so it's not really, and I don't show any plans in this project because I have a really large, rendering that I show and a really large section that I really take them in. I don't need to show them a plan. I've already showed them 2 floor plans already in my previous projects. Why do I have to keep showing them floor plans? So, and the reason why I keep showing them renderings is because they need to see some type of imagery for the drawing. But it doesn't have to be, one of the projects only showed just 2 renderings. Others showed 3. So you can vary. Maybe the one project is more model heavy. One is more drawing heavy. One is more diagram heavy. So here, I don't even have a floor plan for this project because I really take them in already, right, with this section and with the diagrams. So again, I'm using the text up above as, graphic. They are true labels, but I'm using them as a graphic placeholder. This isn't good, by the way. This right here, I should have pushed this down. They shouldn't intersect with it. I should push the key down like that. That's too, that's too, you never want to intersect with, don't want to intersect with your dimension string. But again, I'm just using this as a placeholder. Not a placeholder, sorry, but as a graphic element as well to really help balance the space out. And then rendering. This is not a good rendering. First off, I have too many people going in the same direction. I don't really like the lighting, but it's an okay rendering, I would say. But again, this is more of a rendering heavy project, really taking them in, showing them about the object. This is more of an urban spatial object, right? More is about regular architecture. Even here, I don't mind that my text is being blurred out by the white, the white over the white. I don't mind. It's okay. It doesn't bother me. Like I'm aware this is happening. I'm actually more bothered by everyone going in the same direction, but I'm not bothered by that. It's okay. And then here I take them in, right, with like a rendering and a section detail, right? So I'm taking with an interior rendering and then a section detail. Again, always using the text as a graphic element. And again, I would say the impactful image on this project is really this section here and then that rendering. But, these portfolios, like, it's very light in content. It's not heavy. It's not overwhelming. Like, I can really, toggle through this portfolio quite quickly, but I'm getting hit with, like, impactful images at least once or twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times per project, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to make sure, like, each project you're gonna hit them with some impactful content of work, okay? Whether it's models or diagrams or details, you really want to hit them with these things per project. And so this feels light, like I can toggle through it and it doesn't feel overwhelming. Some might critique it as it being too light, but that's just a matter of preference. It depends, the people who are looking at it. It's gonna vary. Okay, and then, let's say you were working at a professional project, a professional firm, and you had professional photos. You might want to give photo credits at the end, and that's it. Okay, I want to also talk about people who have professional experience, maybe like 1, 2, 3 years of professional experience, and maybe they have some construction administration under their belt, and they want to show off their work about construction administration and construction. Personally, I think what I'm going to show you is like the perfect layout for this. And it's something like this, where you show them a final image, like an actual real final built photo of your project. Not just one, but like this is an example of a spread. And then you show them construction process images, right? And then show them a real detail, right? I think this is a perfect example of conveying to an employer that, hey, I have schematic design experience all the way up to construction administration experience. You're still going to show them your other drawings, right? Whether it's process, other photos, complete photos, diagrams. You're still going to do that and show that. But I think if you really want to convey that, hey, I've seen all of the phases of the work, and this is for me to, and I can prove this to you via portfolio, is you show a nice photo, complete of the project, and a couple construction photos, and then like descriptive text, and then right next to it on the spread is like a detail from a construction document showing that portion of that project. And then when you get called in for the interview, you're clearly going to you might bring in a full construction document set of a project, right? Or they're going to talk to you more about it, and you'll talk more about it. They'll tell in the interview if you really have experience or not, right? But I think spreads like that for people who have professional experience really quickly lets them know, okay, this person does have legit professional experience, because I'm seeing their construction and their construction document set and their construction administration experience, and I'm seeing all the diagrammatic and process work as well from the previous spreads that I was giving. So that's the only difference I would show if you have like professional experience. But other than that, that's about it for the portfolio, And let me go to the resumes again, right? I want to show the resume because I'm noticing a certain fad that people do in their resumes. Like, I notice that a lot of people, they put like charts and graphs and dots about their level of experience. I wish people stop doing that. I think just keep things brutally simple on your resume. Even your CVs are supposed to be a little bit more detailed, but to be honest, keep it very simple. And I guess like very terse, like to the point, So like just your name, credentials, if you have any credentials, your email, right? Portfolio link. And then again, start off with your education, certifications, whether you're licensed or not. And then your experience, what you can do is, give the company name, its location. This is a typo, be careful. And then, your date, your role, and then maybe even like a 1-sentence description, and then list the projects, its location, its date, your role, the square footage, and the project type, right? And the phase of work that you were in and whether it's completed or not. And that's it. That I feel like this is more than enough to let them know, what your experience. And you can repeat it for every project, right? And then, your software, don't give me these little charts and dots. Just say what you know. And when you get interviewed, they'll ask you, if you know this or that, and just be honest. But that's about it. That's really it. It's not that. This is how I like to do portfolios. Some people like to make it more, I guess, quote unquote, more fun. That's totally fine. But really respect the margins, respect consistency, or expect, that this idea that everything should be framing your work. Your portfolio should frame your work. Your portfolio shouldn't be about your portfolio. Your portfolio shouldn't be distracting. Okay? So everything should frame your work. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any comments or questions, just please leave it in the comment section below. And if you even want me to review your portfolios, I'd be more than glad to review your portfolios. I can even make a video if you want me to review your portfolios. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did find it helpful, please like and subscribe. It'll really help the channel grow. Thank you.